Hey everyone, this podcast is part of Story Mode, the podcast network of Gamefully Unemployed. You can support us and gain access to other great exclusive podcasts at patreon.com/gamefullyunemployed. That's patreon.com/GAMEFULLY unemployed, which is spelled like it sounds.
Welcome back to Movie Bros.
There's 100% of podcasts out there called Movie Bros. Yeah, there has to be. So even as a joke, I don't even think we can introduce ourselves that way.
I'm one of your hosts, David Bell.
I am Jason Pargin.
And I think you're a host, right? I would call you a host
for this. Yeah, for this series, I'm sitting in. Well,
yeah,
Tom is away.
Yeah. And as always, thank you so much for doing that. For people who are just joining us, I mean, you shouldn't be just joining us. There is a 2-hour previous episode that you can watch with your ears. That is, we're going over kind of just problems that we have with modern blockbusters. Most specifically in the writing, we're calling out tropes and techniques that we feel should not happen anymore, or not nearly as much.
Specifically, these are things about story, character, things like that. We're not going to complain about like the quality of the special effects, mainly because I think that's things we have less expertise on. At least, I'm a professional storytelling person. You write screenplays that are in the process of being produced. I don't know what can be said or not, or what.
Yeah, I am hoping to be a professional storytelling person soon. I have a single script that's currently optioned, and I'm working on others. And that's pretty much it. There's nothing. No one told me I can't say stuff.
So, like last week, we focused on issues with character and dialogue and things that should be very basic, we feel like, when telling a story that modern blockbusters frequently fail at with shocking regularity, mostly having to do with the way movies are made now. Big movies are made now. Like, obviously, you can go deep into the streaming services and find small, heartfelt movies that do not break any of these rules, but the big movies now, these are things that we see come up a lot and seem to be trending in the bad direction. So
I think it's movies that aspire to make $1 billion, I think TV has been really good lately. I think indie has been really good. Certain genres have been really good. But when you're making a blockbuster now as a studio, it feels like their starting point, where they're coming from, is like built for them to fail. Why that is, we'll get into at a later date. For now, we're just talking about the examples of that. And this episode is specifically about story structure, about how movies put together their narratives.
Yes. And this is, I almost hesitate to use the term story structure because it sounds like an insider term, but these are basic things that when you are telling a story to a human, that if you are making up a bedtime story to tell to a child, there are basic conventions to follow in terms of, explaining what's about to happen or why it's about to happen or how to build tension that movies fail at. And again, we're going to use the same disclaimer we said last time. These are writing problems. We are not blaming the screenwriters. They are put into impossible positions the way these films are made today.
It's a process, yeah. It's a process, and it's hard to pin down a specific person whose fault it is. Most often, I especially lately, having sort of been working on a screenplay for something that, aims to make $1 billion. It's that kind of script. I feel a lot for the screenwriters, because you can sort of, a movie like watching The Tomorrow War, which we brought up a lot in the last episode, I don't get mad at the screenwriters anymore. I get sad for them. where I can see like their struggle. That said, I'm sure the screenwriter made a lot of money and is perfectly happy. Yeah, and so I guess let's you want to dig into it?
Yes.
Yeah, let's do this. We're gonna start by talking about plot twists. Something that, you know, I think always creates issues. But specifically in this case, we're talking about plot twists, and this does feel like something that happens more recently that are not unearned twists that aren't foreshadowed. And in fact, when you watch the movie a second time, you're like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. Or wait, that completely ruins the point of the movie.
Yes, it undermines the emotional through line, or it clearly was added later. As we've mentioned in previous episodes of when I've come on the show in the past, we've talked about movies where they did it was all in the protagonist's imagination twist, but then their imagination was stuff that they weren't there to see.
Right.
Like, so that includes scenes that you weren't in, like you're so crazy that you imagined things that you were not aware of.
Yeah. The recent example is in something I actually really enjoyed, the second Fear Street. Without spoiling it, a lot of that is a flashback told from one character's point of view, and there's a reveal that it's actually from a different character's point of view, and it's like, wait, but they know things that character didn't tell you. Like, it's a lot of that, where you go back and you watch it knowing that, and you're like, there's no way this person could have known that stuff. Or like that Halle Berry movie, Perfect Stranger, where, spoilers, she turns out to be the killer, even though there are scenes where she's by herself scared of the killer. And it's like, oh, so that was for us. That was for the people watching the movie. She's not doing it for any reason.
Yeah, or there'll be a case where the killer is shown to us, the audience, like over her shoulder, but she doesn't see the killer.
Yeah.
But it's like, well, but if she imagined it all, who was that for?
Yeah, what are we watching? One that probably no one has seen this movie. It came out recently, The Woman in the Window. Jason, did you see that movie?
I have seen it come up on some menu of a streaming service, but I have not watched it. Is it on Netflix?
Maybe. Do you care if I spoil it? No?
Anyone listening, we are free with spoilers, and these are spoilers for recent movies because the entire point of this, these are complaints about, these are recent trends we don't like. So yes, go ahead.
That's one that definitely does this, where the plot of it's like Rear Window. This agoraphobic meets the new neighbor, this woman played by Julianne Moore, and then later he sees her get murdered across the street by her husband. She reports it, and a different woman shows up and is like, no, I'm this man's wife. And the whole movie is like, oh, is she gaslit? What happened? The obvious thing is Julianne Moore was never the wife. Something that happens at the end as a twist. The whole time she's a landlord. And her neighbor, who's also paying rent, has a scene where he has like a woman he's sleeping with, and it turns out to be Julianne Moore. And she, in front of this guy, like describes her name, and he never brings up the fact like, oh, I know what's happening. It's this other woman. No one ever says that, and it becomes the twist of the movie. So when you watch the movie again, you're like, so many times people could have stepped in and prevented this from happening. And I think that's more or less the kind of twist we're talking about, where it's like, after the twist, you realize most of the movie is either unnecessary or nonsense.
And here's the thing. The broader point here is that the desire to insert a twist is so pervasive that the idea that at the end of, for example, the Wonder Woman movie, there has to be a twist that the villain isn't who you thought it was. There's no reason for that. There's no twist in Indiana Jones. There's no twist in, name a classic. There's no twist in Jaws, where it turns out, wait, it wasn't a shark. It was a serial killer in a shark costume. the idea that you need this, and I guess The Sixth Sense, when it made billions of dollars, that convinced everyone that every movie had to have a twist, even though they're totally misunderstanding why that twist worked. That you can watch The Sixth Sense multiple times and it continues to make sense. It's still...
Right.
And the twist is tied into the emotional core of the movie. The twist brings that character's arc to a close. It works perfectly. But now the idea that we're making an action blockbuster, and that, like, I get it that people liked the twist with the Mandarin and Iron Man 3, but I still feel it where it's like, okay, what's it going to be in this movie? We have to find out who we thought was the bad guy is not, or who we thought was the killer is not, whatever. And as if that's the only way to surprise an audience, or that's the only way to keep the audience engaged. And that's silly. The idea that you can not make a Wonder Woman movie without concealing who the antagonist is,
right,
until the end, is bizarre.
There's this need for, like, it was me all along, you know, where they feel like it's not even necessarily a twist. It's like a but wait moment. The Tomorrow War has one, which of course we mentioned a lot previous episode, where the reveal is, oh, the aliens were always here and we can just go kill them now. When you learn that, you realize, oh, so the entire movie was useless. And I think that happens a lot. Army of the Dead has one that is huge, I thought, which is, you saw Army of the Dead, right?
Yes.
Which is that they're supposed to be going on this heist. They've been hired to go and get this money from a casino. We learn that they don't even want the money, the people who hired them. All they actually want is zombie DNA. So that happens when the guy who's sent to, like, go along and make sure everything is going to plan betrays them, locks them in the vault, and goes to get the zombie DNA. The problem is we see the way he does that is he goes to this specific car right outside the casino and right at the wall to get in, and basically gets the zombie's attention and takes her head, which is something that they almost do at the very beginning of the movie. Like, we learn that they never even had to walk in a casino. They literally just had to get over the fence into Vegas, get the zombie's attention, and take her head. And the reason why they made it all a heist is unclear, because there's no reason why they can't hire people and say, hey, we're going to just pay you money. We need to go in there and get some zombie DNA.
Which, by the way, is a perfectly fine plot for a movie.
Yeah.
It's a heist movie, and the heist, instead of getting a bunch of money, is they've got to capture not just a zombie. There's like a special smart zombie or something that they call it. It's going to be hard to get. You're going to have to fight through a bunch of zombies to get it, and then you can have all of the like the heist movie tropes, like the double cross and then the double cross. Like, that's all going to be in there. I get that, but you can just. It still has to make sense at the end, because the whole point is there's multiple people competing for the prize, and you're stabbing each other in the back, and then the fun isn't seeing who eventually gets away with the prize. Instead, they do it where it's like, I'm hiring you to go into zombie-infested Las Vegas and get the money from this casino, and they go in and get it. And it's like, aha, this was all a ruse. We actually just needed this much easier thing. It's like, well, why didn't we just do that? There's no, our interests are not at odds. You could have paid us each like $1,000. We'll go in there and get you a piece of a zombie. Like, that's fine. Like, and then the fun of the movie, the twists are in all of the complications in trying to accomplish this. And in the people within their crew, like, backstabbing each other. Like, well, I'm going to get out here. Like, instead of splitting the money with all of you, I'm just going to take the zombie back there by myself and collect the full payment. Like, let that be the motivation. But the twist, I guess that they're afraid that we would see that coming. And so there's this thing where it's like the only way to get a twist that they're not going to anticipate is to make the twist just total nonsense.
Yeah. I think you nailed it with the heist movie genre too, is there's this weird instinct with heists specifically to have an Ocean's 11 moment. that in certain movies deflates it completely. I think about the new Black Widow. They do essentially a heist. They go onto that floating base. They get kidnapped. So it seems, and then twist. Oh, this was all part of the plan, right? Everything was to get the bad guy's like weird code that he, for some reason, has to like drag a ring on a pad to do. And it actually dissolves the tension. Because it means, oh, nobody, like, this is the third act, this is the low point, and it turns out it was all part of the plan, and nothing matters. So like, a lot of twists, I feel like, are those moments are ways for movies to, like, have their cake and eat it, too, where they're like, oh, you're worried about the characters. Oh, twist, it was all part of their plan. And it's like, oh, okay, so all that worry you did previously is for nothing.
Yeah, and these are movies that I guess are clearly only intended to be watched once.
Yeah.
Because if you try to watch Army of the Dead a second time, like that's going to stick in your brain because they actually make a point. Like we're right here next to the door, and we have the thing that you now know is the thing they actually want. It's like you could have just walked out with it.
Yeah, you can take it right there.
Everything you watch from here on out, it's like, well, this is all stupid. Like why? Whereas, you watch The Sixth Sense a second time and it ties into the central theme of the character. It's like, oh, this guy is aimless, not because he's having a midlife crisis. It's because he's a ghost and he's hanging on to this old life, not metaphorically, but literally. Like everything about his behavior and about his connection to this kid. That's like, oh, it's not the connection of a middle-aged man to this kid who needs his help. It's a connection of a ghost to a living person who can actually talk to him. And it all makes perfect sense in the end. But it's that whole thing we talked about in the previous episode. Again, if you've not listened to it, please go back and do. But the concept that the movie needs to be like engaging in the moment, but not any more than that. It doesn't need to be like a cohesive whole. It's all about, is this moment exciting? And so like the twist, the in the moment is shocking because, well, I didn't see this coming because it's total nonsense. Of course I didn't see it coming.
Right. It's the thing where for a twist to be good, it has to actually be solvable. Also, I mean, it's that thing of like famously The Sixth Sense. They didn't actually have the twist until like the fifth draft of that script because they weren't thinking about it in terms of we need a twist. It came organically and made a lot of sense, where now it feels like twists are more of these forced ideas. Did you see the movie Serenity?
Which?
Oh, the Matthew McConaughey one.
Oh, is that what it's called?
Serenity. It's called Serenity.
Where it turns out he's like inside a video game or something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You absolutely need to see Serenity. It's one of the most batshit films recently. And it's a film that feels like it started with someone thinking up a plot twist and then working backwards from there. And the twist is so dumb and weird that the movie is just fundamentally broken. In a fascinating way, I would argue, in a way that's very fun to watch. Where, Matthew McConaughey turns out to be in a video game, which we learn halfway through the movie, that is made by his son, because he actually died in Iraq. And the son is playing out like this therapeutic game. And then it's unclear whether or not he's become like self-aware, if he has a soul. The movie just kind of falls apart after that, spectacularly. Like it's an amazing film to watch because it's so fucking weird. But that's a twist that like you could never really like. You can there's actually kind of clues to it at least, but it's so out of nowhere that it's like, what? How could I possibly have figured that out? And it's something that I know Tom has talked about a lot. Is like if you're making a murder mystery, the answer has to be solvable. It has to be something that you can actually solve watching the movie, right? Same with twists, is that twists should be things that on second viewing you say, oh, all the signs were there. The problem is that I think we expect them now, and it's become just like a plot device as opposed to a major thing that happens in a movie. You know, like M. Night Shyamalan, we watch his movies now and we are just like sitting there looking for the twist.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think of, like in horror, you don't have to have a twist. I can't emphasize this enough. Like, I get that there's a twist in Friday the 13th that it turns out that it's his mother or whatever, but there's no twist in Halloween.
Right.
There's no twist in Nightmare on Elm Street. Like, you can have the cat and mouse game between the protagonist and antagonist. You can have someone trying to solve a mystery where you're uncovering more information, but it's not a twist. So, like, if you wanted to tell that story about a kid who tries to reconnect with his dad through, like, a computer simulation, you could just make the movie about that. Like, openly make the movie about that.
Right.
You don't need to have, like, this, oh, the floor has fallen out from under my feet. You know, oh, my gosh, it's like Fight Club or whatever. Everything I thought I knew was wrong. It's like you don't have to do it that way. You can just tell that story. You can trust the audience to want to just follow that story.
Here is, I think, where this happens a lot is I was working on a script with producers, and we were writing something that was pretty straightforward. And at one point that question came up. Someone said, well, can we do something with this? Can you tell it out of order? Can you do something narratively weird with it? And the reason why they wanted it made a lot of sense, which is that this script is going to be on a desk and it needs to stand out because it's going to be amongst a bunch of other scripts. And I think that's why this happens a lot because you look at a film like Dread, which I think might have a couple of little twists where it's like, oh, good guys are actually bad, but nothing like big and complicated. That's a very straightforward film, right? Or John Wick.
Yeah, there's no twist in John Wick.
Yeah, but it's really hard from a screenwriter's perspective if you're just writing this and putting it out there to get something like that noticed, because a lot of the fun of movies like that is how they're done, as opposed to the actual what's on the page. And I think that's how some of these get made. I think that's why a movie like Serenity gets made, because that script excites some producer because it's different and new. They never stop to ask, wait, but is it good? They're just like, look at this weird like catch, this weird added bonus on this story. And then they think about movies like Fight Club or a lot of Fincher films that have twists, or an M. Night Shyamalan film, and they're like, we can be the next that. And I think that's how that happens. With something like Army of the Dead, a movie or like Wonder Woman, that feels more like a weird plot device that they've just accepted that needs to be in movies now, you know?
Yeah, because it's a case with if someone's making a blockbuster and they've got a clumsy twist, or somebody's making just like a small mid-budget thriller and it's got like a clumsy twist, like I get it. Like there, you needed to sell it in one sentence. You needed to sit down with somebody and say, okay, it's going to turn out that this woman and the serial killer, like the victim and serial killer, it turns out they're the same person, that she's actually stalking herself. And it's like, okay, there's our hook. That's what people are going to remember about this. Make it. If you're making Wonder Woman, or you're making, any of these movies where you feel like, okay, there's got to be what appears to be a climax, and then there's got to be like a fourth act where it's almost like a video game boss, where it's like we've revealed that the actual villain was this other person, or it's like we've got to follow a point here where within franchises they'll do this, where a subsequent episode, it's really the same kind of issue where they will have some sort of like the James Bond movie Spectre has the twist that everything that happened in all the previous Bond adventures was all orchestrated by the Blofeld or whoever the villain is there. And it's like, you don't need to do that. You're either, if your twist ruins the rest of the story, and in Wonder Woman it does, because it makes a lot of the themes not make any sense. Or if it ruins, like watching a previous movie and you now know, oh, he wasn't actually in danger. This was all staged by the villain that we're going to find out 2 movies from now. That seems to me like to be so obviously wrong that it's a mistake that no one should make. And I don't necessarily know I don't know at what stage of writing Wonder Woman you decide, okay, well, we need it to, like, the one man who's being nice to her, it's got to turn out that he's
right.
Ares, the god of war or whatever. And then you got that ridiculous thing where the guy looks exactly the same when he's
it's David Thewlis, who's like a British actor. He was in the Harry Potters. He's not someone you think of as Ares, the god of war. So he's like still got his mustache and stuff.
They cut to like a flashback, or they show him the CGI Greek god version of him, and it looks exactly like him.
Oh yeah,
and it's almost funny, but because it doesn't make any sense. It's like the whole point is that it's the last person you'd suspect. It's like, well, we didn't suspect because it doesn't make any sense. It's
right. You mentioned Spectre, and I think there's a big part of this, and this can get us into the next section, which is the blank was behind it all twist, which is what they do in Spectre, right? The idea is they say, and the next section we want to talk about is the idea of a sequel or prequel kind of ruining the previous movies, because, and this often happens now because we make movies like, way after the fact, and so it's this need to keep making sequels and prequels. And if they, don't pay attention, or don't understand the previous films, they can do this. But in Spectre, the reveal is like, we're the reason behind everything you've done up until this point, right? That's the reveal there.
As I understand it, if I was misunderstanding that movie, somebody can correct us in your comments or whatever. But I thought that was because his whole thing was like, I am the orchestrator of all of your pain. And
right.
Like they are so powerful that literally everything you thought you were doing, it was all just in service to this moment
right.
Because it turns out Blofeld is his stepbrother.
I think this goes back to, we talked about this, the chosen one idea, right? In the previous episode, where a character like Harry Potter, the thing that also comes with Harry Potter is Voldemort, where it's this weird, we do this weird thing with characters where every character needs their own Joker. You know what I mean? And so I think what they were trying to do in Spectre is they thought this was the last Bond movie and they wanted to really raise the stakes. So they love this idea that it's like everything leading up to this point was them. I think they did this in the Sherlock Holmes as well, in the TV series. They did this in Star Wars with Palpatine, where Palpatine's like, oh, actually Snoke was me. Everything was me. And what that does is create a situation where it feels like nothing matters, right?
Yeah.
Until that point.
That third Star Wars sequel movie is the platonic ideal of introducing curveballs that just ruin the previous movies altogether.
Palpatine is introduced in the opening crawl.
Or
resurrected, rather.
And it's a twist. It's true. Nobody saw that coming, but that's because it was literally never mentioned or foreshadowed or anything or conceived of on the writer's end prior to that moment, and after the original cut of the movie had already been shot. I fully believe. I think Palpatine was added in reshoots, but I don't know that because no one will come out and say so.
Who can say? The last Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom does this, where they introduce James Cromwell, and he's just like, "Oh yeah, did you know Hammond had a partner this whole time? Here he is." And it's like, well, why haven't we seen him until now? And the reason is because they hadn't thought him up until that moment. But they, for some reason, felt like they needed that character. So they do this thing where they're just like, yeah, he was always there.
And
it's like, oh, okay.
It's that need to put the previous movies in some new light that I don't get. Like, I get that it has an impact on the audience because it's like, everything they thought they accomplished in the previous movie, it turned out it was all for naught. It's like, well, but that I still would like to be able to revisit that old movie. It's like,
right?
Like, no, that it turned out in the sequel that was all a dream someone was having, basically.
Right.
Yeah, and instead of like writing a fresh adventure for these people, it's the same thing because they're almost treating sequels like prequels, where it's like the sequels got to Because like the Terminator movies, I realize those are time travel based, but it's all got to like retroactively change something from the previous movies. The Saw franchise is entirely this. Like every sequel is like, actually, the guy you thought died in the first movie, it turned out he was in on it. And it's like,
right.
Oh, okay. Like
Scream does this as well. Scream 3, they reveal the bad guy was there from the beginning.
Yeah.
They love that.
It's like, it's going to make, and it's like, why though? You're making, like, I get that prequels come with a built-in limitation that you have to make it connect to the next movie that already exists. But on a sequel, it's like, why not just do new stuff? Why do you feel like you have to, it's like, well, we have to undo some plot element from before. And again, it's in the name of that twist style where the twist is so it blows you away so much that it ruins the entire franchise up to now. It renders everything they were doing pointless. Like, okay.
I think there's a few reasons. I think nostalgia sometimes plays into it. Like I think about Terminator Genesis, where they like butt into Terminator 1 and rewrite it, and they're like, yeah, you know how everybody loves Terminator 2? Let's erase that from the timeline. And it's like, what a weird decision to make. And I think it's because since they're not planning them in advance, right? They're just trying to make it so that the stakes are higher and make it meaningful every time. And the best way to do that is to have a character go, no, I'm actually the bad guy all along. And now by defeating me, it's the cathartic ending. You compare that with a movie like Lord of the Rings, where it's like they have a very set idea for this trilogy. And like, imagine if instead of that, they killed Sauron in like the second movie, and then someone popped up and went, actually, I was the guy pulling the strings this whole time, and now you have to defeat me. Where it's like they didn't do the work to set up a villain like a Thanos that we eventually get to. So they have to like create them at the last minute. That's what it feels like. And that I think is a new thing, as opposed to like, there's always been narrative resets. An example I was thinking of is in the Jack Ryan show. He like slowly builds a relationship with a woman in season 1 who vanishes from season 2. But I don't think that's any different than, say, like John McClane keeps breaking up with Holly in every movie, Like, they love to do that. And that's been around for a while. I think the specific idea of, like, changing, like, moving the goalposts of who the villain is, that feels very new to me.
Yeah, or the very weird and egregious sin that the new Star Wars movies made, where now the end of Return of the Jedi was apparently totally meaningless, like what they accomplished there, because the Empire just rebranded and came back bigger and stronger than ever before. It's like, okay, well, what was that all about then? Why did all of those people die? Why did Darth Vader sacrifice himself? If that was just like a photocopy of Palpatine or whatever the lore wound up being, it's like, don't you understand that movie still exists? I would like to be able to go back and still watch it. But it's like, now we know, Palpatine had actually uploaded his consciousness to the cloud. Or whatever. I don't even remember. I'm going to be frank. I don't remember how they justified.
Having just watched it, they don't. There's a part where a character says, how could that be? And someone rattles off like cloning, Sith magic. Who can say? Like, they literally, that's what they do. They rattle off a bunch of vague possibilities, and then the movie moves on. So,
but apparently it's a technology that neither Luke nor Darth Vader were aware of, or else they wouldn't have relaxed after having thrown the Emperor into a chasm. Darth Vader would be like, well, this is just the beginning, because he can make a new copy of himself anytime he wants.
Right.
And can manifest an entire fleet of Star Destroyers. Like, this battle that's happening outside right now is meaningless. Like, he's losing nothing here. He can just manifest in it. Like, we've got to go do more. But of course, because that hadn't been conceived of when that ending was shot. I get that. But the idea that when you're starting new, that your first impulse is just to erase, like, the stakes where we're saving the galaxy, and it's just like, oh no, they actually didn't save the galaxy. It's in the exact same peril it was before, just 20 years later, however much time supposed to have passed. It's like, man, that sucks a lot. Like, you can do this in ways where it's a brand new threat. That's like, well, yeah, but that doesn't have these exact same 12 names that the fans apparently demand in their Star Wars coming back again and again and again.
I think it makes it really hard when these series put the fate of the world or universe at stake, and then they feel like they've concluded, and then people won't let them die. So, like, I think that's what Marvel is currently going to be dealing with, right? Like, literally, they saved half of the universe, and now they're expected to make more films. And I'm like, what could possibly be the next threat? The escalation of that is going to be out of its mind. And it goes both ways, where, like, prequels like The Hobbit feel like the most useless films ever, because they're like, here's us fighting a dragon, and it's like, that's great. I mean, you know, in a little bit you're going to be fighting for the fate of Middle Earth, so
especially
what do I care?
When they have to keep dropping those hints. Now keep in mind, in the background, you know, it's Sauron is gathering his army and Mordor and all that. It's like, well, why are we messing around with this?
Right. It creates a futility to either the movie you're watching or the movies you watched, where it like undermines either their own goal or it undermines previous films. Like learning that Rey can force heal people and that Force ghosts can do stuff, which they add in the last Star Wars. And now you go back and watch the other Star Wars and you're like, wait, that would come in really handy. Like, there's literally the reason Darth Vader became Darth Vader is because he was seeking the power to bring people back to life, which is something that Rey just does now in the end. And it's like, it just makes everything feel dumber.
Yes, in short.
Yeah, and I think there's a thread of that. Again, like kind of like the Obi-Wan stuff, there's a Die Hard prequel coming up. That also feels like something where it's like, I can't possibly see that working, because the entire point of that character was that he was an everyman thrown into this adventure that he had never done before. By creating a prequel, you suddenly trivialize the later films that way.
Yeah, and Han Solo, the entire point of that character in the original trilogy is that he is just a smuggler.
Right.
He's not, you know, and that Chewie is just his co-pilot. Like, they are not both epic warriors that have been entangled in this central goings on in this galaxy. He is just a smuggler they ran into. That's the entire fun of the character. He's a small time, like, he owes money to a gangster, and that's it. You know, and the entire character is him. Like, he doesn't care about any of this. And that he comes to care about. That's his character arc. The moment you go back and say, okay, well, here's a young Solo, and then here's him having that arc before, or like here, you know, it's the same thing. Yeah, it's like here's a young John McClane when he was doing heroism before. It's like, well, if he was used to doing hero stuff, then Die Hard makes no sense, because the entire point was that he was, you know, out of his depth. That was the whole thing that made it interesting.
I remember the joke when, people were like, they're making a Han Solo origin story, and people were like, isn't that A New Hope? Like, isn't that what that's called? Because it's kind of the reverse of the blank was behind it all, where they go back and make the emphasis or the meaning of the later films somehow meaningless. But they have to make the prequels. They have to make the sequels. That's what it comes down to, right?
Yeah. You cannot simply tell new stories in that universe. Having a franchise means you have to have the exact same few names, because otherwise audiences just won't. Apparently they believe audiences just won't tolerate it if it's like, well, hey, it's still the same universe with the Force and lightsabers and all that stuff, only it's another corner of the galaxy, totally new group of people facing a totally different threat, totally different tyrant. Nope, it's got to be Darth Vader. It's got to be the familiar costume, and it's like, man, have some faith in your audience, some little bit.
Well, there's I want to transition over to another remake prequel thing, which is that there's this need, and it's so much in Star Wars, and we sort of touched on it in the last episode, to like fill the world with references to the previous stuff when you're making a sequel, as opposed to focusing on the tone of the world. And what I mean by that is there's this weird obsession with, like we said, you have to have the characters. You have to have Darth Vader. Even though this world is so rich in its atmosphere that you could make a totally different story within
and people
it.
have done that.
Yeah.
There's video games that have done that.
That's what I wanted to talk about is like, there's Shadows of the Empire. There's a bunch of Star Wars games. What's the role-playing one?
Knights of the Old Republic?
Yeah, Knights of the Old Republic. That new one that just came out, even though that one does cram Darth Vader in it, but they do it really well. Another example is Alien Isolation, which is a fantastic addition to like the Alien universe. It's Ripley's daughter, so it does kind of, do the thing where it's like, oh, this is staying in the main plot, but it doesn't try to just constantly reference Alien or do the same things. It's just a really amazing recreation of that world, like the old style computers. And you look at that, you look at something like Prometheus and Alien Covenant, where they don't recreate that world. They make it like updated and new, and they just obsess with the mythology of aliens, something that we don't give a shit about. And they're trying to show all the references. They're like, oh, the spaceship in the first one. How did it get there? We're going to show you things that we couldn't really care about, as opposed to just making something that exists in the universe and nailing the point of it. Like Star Trek Picard's another one. We talked about that, how it's filled with references, but they completely miss the tone of TNG. And I would argue tone is actually the thing that matters, right? Like, you can kind of do both. I'd say the reason the new Blade Runner is seen as good is like, yeah, Harrison Ford's back, but it really doesn't feel like he needs to be in it. That it's almost like that's an extra bonus, because it's more about, oh, we've extended this universe of Blade Runner in a way that you didn't even know you wanted to see, with all new characters and all new problems. And Star Wars just cannot figure that out.
And with like the Picard show, the fact that it's like, well, we've got to cram in the Borg woman, 7 of 9,
right,
or Riker. Yeah. We've got to get them. But they otherwise did not seem to have watched any of the episodes of the Next Generation of the show. Because
they really didn't.
Because the entire point was that like each episode tackles like some sci-fi philosophical problem, and there's action and there's stuff that explodes and there's things happening, but it's a matter of Picard having to think his way through a conflict and often be like the voice of reason, and trying to like puzzle out what it means and all that. Like, if you kept that tone but cast someone else to be that guy, you would make a better Picard show, even if it didn't have him in it. Like if it made that guy his son or something. But they misunderstand what it means to connect to the property, it seems like. And again, to re-emphasize what we've been saying, there is no doubt a directive that has come down, from the studio or whoever's in charge of it, like, no, we want to bring back Jonathan Frakes. We want to bring back this person and this person. We want to bring back Brent Spiner. Like, we've got to get them all in there. Got to bring back Q, and now you've got to find a way to do that. And then also we need like a lot of action. We need a lot of shooting. Stuff like more from the movies,
right?
Stunts.
Classic TNG action.
Classic TNG. Yeah, and because that stuff looks great in the trailer, and that's what modern audiences want. And if you want to make an action sci-fi show, just make an action sci-fi show. Make it about, star somebody who's more of an action sci-fi man. But why make that your Star Trek Picard show? Like, why?
Right.
it doesn't make sense to me. But again, I know that it all comes down to business reasons. Again, neither of us are naive about how stuff is made. It's just these are fundamental storytelling things that I, again, feel like these are objectively bad. It's not personal preference. I feel like you're not... Things like not matching the tone of the thing that is supposed to be a spinoff of, to me, that's fundamental. Because it's like, well, then why is it even the same franchise?
Also, I want to clarify on tone, because I don't just mean atmosphere or like look. I think tone also encapsulates why people loved the thing to begin with. For example, the first two Terminator films are chase movies. The first one is almost a slasher horror. The sequel is an action, but the core of Terminator is we need to get away from this unstoppable killing machine, and we have no idea how to stop it. We have no idea how to kill it. We have no idea what we're going to do, and then they have to think up a solution. And the fact that John Connor is the savior of mankind in the time travel is almost like incidental. It's a footnote. It's a device used to get the movie going. Much like in the Aliens movies, the Prometheus aliens are a device. They're a device to get the eggs there, and then the movie can begin. And as these series went on, they got like so bogged down with the side of things that we don't care that they forget, like, no, just be a chase movie. Just be a horror movie. Just be the thing that they love to begin with. Mad Max Fury Road, which is our star student, of course nailed that, because they're like, we don't even need to have Mel Gibson in this. You don't need to drag out old Mel Gibson like they did with Indiana Jones. Mad Max can be anybody, and let's just make it fun and a car chase, because that's what people like. Apocalypse, car wrecks, stunts. We got it. Let's go, Yeah,
the first two Terminator movies are not time travel movies.
No, not at all.
Because a time travel movie, like you're dealing with paradoxes and you're dealing with trying to undo this or that. It's like the philosophy of, trying to prevent the apocalypse and that sort of thing is very much incidental. It's just the motivation is still, here is a child who is in danger, or here's a woman who's in danger. We are trying to get this person to safety. That is something anyone can understand. And then all of the bits of it that are masterful comes in the staging of the action and the tension and how it unveils what the Terminator can do and all of those things. And, it's because the whole point is, any time travel movie, if you think about it too much, it totally falls apart. Yeah. Like everything about what the machines are doing to try to stop this war. Like they're choosing the most ineffective possible, like to go kill, like John Connor as a child or kill his mother or whatever. It's like, a logical computer would not come up with that. And it doesn't matter. It's because that's not what's great about it. But then in the later movies, when it starts to be about, oh, look, the fun is we circled back and intersected with the old movie because via time travel. It's like, that's not in the spirit of what they're doing at all. That is so not the point. The same as no one who watched the first two Alien movies, the point of the central thrust of those movies is not to discover the origin of the aliens. They know nothing about the aliens at the end of the second movie. They don't need to. They're these very smart insects that use humans as hosts. They're terrifying. And then what's engaging about it is trying to get the characters to safety and get away from them. And that's all you need. Because from there, all of the brilliance can unspool from all of these great moments. And they're in the room and they've got the tracker, the motion tracker. And then suddenly the tracker has the aliens in the room with them. And it doesn't make sense. There's so much genius in the geography of that scene and how they set it up and everything that you don't need. There's no twist in that movie. The closest thing that movie comes to a twist is that they thought they had killed the queen and it turned out she had outsmarted them. But that's not a twist. That is the back and forth between hero and villain you get in a movie where you thought you had won and then they survived and then now you have to kill them for real. That they didn't find out at the end that it's the aliens were secretly a genetic weapon designed by Burke or whatever. It's you don't need that.
Yeah. It's like if they made a Friday the 13th movie about Jason as a kid that was like an origin and showing like him, drowning and his mother grieving and like really like expanding that part. And it's like, we don't care about that. That was literally a few sentences to explain why this thing is just murdering people. We're done with that. It's so. I get what Ridley Scott was trying to do with Prometheus, but it blows my mind that they made an alien film and didn't have an alien in it. That's so weird.
And people could say, well, Alien 3 and Alien 4 sucked, and those were what you're asking for. It was just more adventures of people fighting aliens in a new location.
Right.
But I thought those, like Alien 3 struggled because it's hard to go backward to where you're just fighting a single dog-sized alien after the previous movie was you're trying to fight your way through an entire hive of them. And then Alien 4 was the case where just...
All right. I'm not gonna win people over by saying this. I would argue neither of those films suck, but I know most people think they do, and I get that. I always thought the pattern of the Alien movies that I loved was the fact that the first four they give to a completely different director who makes it the way they would make it, which I always thought was interesting. The first one, Ridley Scott makes a horror movie. The second one, James Cameron makes a crazy action movie. Third one, David Fincher makes a mess because of the production of that film. But it still has like hints of David Fincher. And the fourth one is Jean-Pierre Jeunet, who did Amélie and City of Lost Children and a bunch of new stuff. And he makes it like he makes it, which is like weird and like dystopian. And so I always thought that was neat about the films. But yeah, traditionally speaking, the third and the fourth are very bad. And in fact, the third one even does some of the stuff we're talking about. They kill off Newt and
it nullifies
and
the end of the previous movie. And again, you can avoid that just by not having Ripley be in the third movie. Make it a new adventure. Right. These aliens land on this cool prison planet. And now these prisoners with no knowledge of what this thing is, they've got to try to solve it. Make the prisoners just more distinct characters. Make it so that everybody doesn't look identical because they're all bald or whatever. Like don't try to force it in, because now it's like, okay, the entire thing of trying to get the little girl and Hicks off the planet, well, it turns out that was for nothing. They just died while they died in their sleep.
And that is also when they start obsessing with mythology, where they're like, the corporation is trying to weaponize them. And they get more into that, and they sort of, you're right, is that getting rid of Ripley is really like would have rescued that series earlier, because her story was kind of over.
She dies at the end of part 3. For part 4, they have to bring her back as a clone.
Yeah.
And again, I understand. Again, we know how movies. We understand that you have to get the star back in there. I understand that you can't get the studio to fund it if you don't have the star attached. But I would argue, like, if you want a strong woman as the hero, it doesn't have to be Ripley. It doesn't have to be Sigourney Weaver. There are other actors you could give it to who could bring that home. The one that's on that prison planet, you can have women there.
A lot of this is like, it's doing the safe thing versus doing the thing that makes more sense narratively. And that's always going to be a problem, right? The studios are like, no, we have to bring back this, and this. And then they have to do it. We're talking about, like, if you're just purely telling a story, what's best for the story itself as opposed to the franchise. And it's hard to separate those things sometimes, I think.
Yeah, because give me an alien movie that's a fresh start. The aliens crash on some big ship or something. And
Prometheus. Imagine if it was on like a cruise ship. Just do because you're right. That's what they should have done with Prometheus. Is they should have just reset it and been like, okay, just new scenario, new hero, and we're gonna find new moments to be had in this. And yeah, there's a million ways they could have done that.
Yeah, as long as you're preserving the core of what's good about it. The core of what's good about it, the nature of the aliens, the nature of the tension, the action, the staging, like the confined spaces, finding a good setting where they work, where they're scary. That's the core of the series. The core of the series is not Ripley. The core of the series is not Bishop. Like, they even bring back Bishop in Alien 3 as it's like the guy who they modeled the cyborg after something. It's like, why? And that's all. That's what this boils down to. Like, the core elements are not the things you think they are. They're not the references. No. They're not even necessarily the characters. And I believe audiences would still be on board, but I don't know. There's someone keeping track of box office receipts at studios who strongly disagrees.
All right. Well, let's talk about action scenes next. One of our next points is useless action scenes. Action scenes that seem to happen without establishing what's at stake and what's happening. This is clearly a problem, I think, that comes from like I love the new Mortal Kombat movie. I love it. It's not a good movie, but I love it. There's a scene where they're walking in the desert and Sonya and Kano literally like put down their stuff and Kano's like, let's fight. And they fight. And I'm not exaggerating that much about how the scene functions. And I think it's because a producer was like, listen, you're this many minutes in, you have to have another fight scene. So they added that in. And I think that's where a lot of this comes from.
Right. I 100%, like, again, we're going to have an episode that finishes the series where we're going to walk through how these movies get made. Yeah. And basically it boils down to, you've got a series of note cards and you've got a series of set pieces you've decided. And when you're trying to pace the movie, they're saying you've got to have an action beat every X number of minutes.
Right.
I swear you can really feel where they've just inserted one. Having two characters who have no reason to fight suddenly just fight is a really common one. And I think personally in Justice League, when Superman, they resurrect him from his death or coma or whatever, and he starts attacking them, like, that's purely just so they can have that for the trailer or whatever. But I didn't feel any tension during that scene, because the whole point of any scene in any story anyone tells is that you, as the listener or as the viewer or whatever, you're rooting for something to occur. This character is running from the killer. You want the character to get away. So when they start fighting, like, every punch, every kick should have drama for you, and it should be staged to maximize that drama, where you're like, oh my gosh, they're not going to make it out of here. In Justice League, they need to resurrect Superman to go fight this bigger problem. You're just in a hurry for them to get to that next part. Like, of course they're going to bring Superman back. So they resurrect Superman, and he, for some reason, decides he's going to start fighting them. And then he shoots his eye lasers at Batman, which again should have just melted Batman instantly, and doesn't, because that can't happen. So is he trying to kill Batman? What is he trying to do? You feel nothing in that scene, because obviously he's not going to pop out and kill the Justice League. But more importantly, you are not involved in that character's motivation. You're not with Superman, like, understanding why he's trying to fight these guys. And with
they're just very vague about it.
Yeah, and with the Justice League, like, they're just trying to not die until he comes to his senses. So it's just like this very expensive, loud, explosive scene with a lot of cool shots. But I'm not emotionally invested in one outcome or the other. He's clearly not going to kill them, and then Darkseid just rules the universe now. And they're not going to kill him. He's not going to remain evil. So you're just like waiting for, okay, get on with it. Like the main plot of the movie is not this. The plot of the movie is all of you getting together to go fight the main bad guy. So it's just like, okay, we've got to stop and have noise occur here.
You very much feel that with Justice League, because even in like the long ass Zack Snyder cut, they really don't explain what Superman's deal is. And yet, because of the way superhero movies work, nothing's at stake. No one can die. It's the same as the fight in the airport fight in Civil War, where it's just a bunch of main characters fighting, and not a single one of them can really get hurt. I think John Cheadle gets Rhodey gets hurt, and then he's fine later. And that's pretty much it. And it is really hard to even figure out what's going on in that scene, right? Like, can you tell me why they're all fighting in that scene?
No. The answer is it's for the trailer, and the answer is, as we'll get into, like the staging of that, like that airport fight in Civil War, that had to be staged and location scouted and all that stuff years before they had a finished script.
I have news for you. There's no location scouting. That was entirely in a computer. That sequence.
Yeah. Either way, somebody has to start building it in a computer a long time.
Rendered.
Like that's in some ways even harder. Like all of that has to be. They have to start on that process long before they've even nailed down who's going to be in the movie. Like they didn't know they were going to have Spider-Man in it until very late. Right. So I get it. It's like midway through the movie, this occurs, and that's something that goes back like The Matrix Reloaded, which we mentioned the Matrix sequels, I think, in the last episode, but like the big car chase that is the central action beat in the movie, they had to like start building that track. Like they built several miles of highway just to film that. That was all being built while they were still working on the script. And you watch the movie, it's not clear where they're trying to go and why. Like they're trying to get away from the bad guys, but it's like, yeah, but what's their goal? And it's a series of extremely cool stunts, but the answer is that they had not worked that out in the script when they were building that 9-mile track of freeway that they could do this great scene in.
It just had to happen. Yeah, that's actually very similar with Civil War, because they're like fighting, like you're on your side, I'm on my side, and I think what's happening is they're trying to get to a ship, like they're trying to get to a plane at the airport, but it feels like there's way easier ways to do this.
Yeah, or like like knowing specifically what happens if they fail. Or what one side, because they're not trying to really hurt each other, so it's this weird thing where they're sort of like play fighting. But we talked. I complain about Tenet a lot. I think that was actually a really bad movie that had some spectacular sequences. Those spectacular sequences just embedded in a mess of a movie. Like,
I don't think anybody's going to push back on that statement. Tenet was a narrative mess.
But like the money shot from the trailers, aside from like the reverse car crash, which incredibly cool, but it was them like rappelling up a building in reverse, like reverse rappelling, but not via time travel. I think they just had a mechanism that would shoot them up the side of the building. Then you watch the movie and it's just they're just doing that so they can have like a quiet conversation with an old woman and get some more exposition. Like it's not even clear why they couldn't have taken an elevator up.
Yes. They are literally. Do you remember seeing like production photos of that, and then in the trailer, and thinking like, "Oh, this is going to be a big thing. This is going to be a big scene of the movie." And yeah, it turns out they literally are doing it because they just don't want to take the elevator.
Yeah,
they're sneaking up to ask a woman a question, and it really felt like. Because they say something where it's like, there's security, we can't get through. And it's like, but surely there are, easier ways of doing this.
But the answer is that they had a series of exposition scenes and they needed something. Like at the script stage, at the plotting stage, you need something there. Right. So they're like, well, it could be a shootout with her bodyguards, but maybe we don't have to like kill people because then the cops would be there, and they can't like have a conversation after the show. Like somehow when they were brainstorming it, it was like, well, what if they have to like rappel up the side of the building to talk to her? And when you're watching it, you don't feel anything because everything about, okay, well, what happens if this fails? They're not trying to run from somebody. They're not trying to beat a ticking clock to get up there. You don't feel anything. As a pair, again, we keep using Fury Road as like the ideal structure for an action movie, but that's a case where every stunt that occurs, it's clear what someone is trying to do, and it's clear what the bad guys are trying to stop them from doing. And it's clear that there's a ticking clock, there's urgency. It's like she has to get from here to there or else this is going to happen. And so all of the craziness that occurs, like they are jumping onto the truck because they're trying to stop her to get the slaves back. Like it's all crystal clear. And so there's emotion built into the stunts. It's not just people flying around on poles. It's like if this person successfully stops the vehicle, then the army that's behind them is going to catch up, and then this is going to happen. Like you feel every moment of it. And I think most of the great action movies that really stick with you have that. Like I feel like the first Matrix film, like there's drama in every kick in that movie and every punch.
Absolutely. It also comes into what we were saying, the fact that these characters, they need the action scenes, but they can't hurt any characters. It actually reminds me a lot of, it's a similar problem in horror movies, where like, for example, that Slender Man movie that everybody has already long forgotten. They keep having these moments where Slender Man finds and terrifies the main character and then just vanishes because they can't kill her, because she's the main character. And so you have to start asking, like, what does the Slender Man want? Because he seems to just be jumping out at them like in a haunted house. The Conjuring movies do this a lot too, where they need to have, there's a producer being like, you need to have a horror moment. You know, you've gone 15 minutes, you need to have a scare. But the scares don't make any sense because they're not like the ghosts don't seem to be trying to hurt them. They're just jumping out at them and then vanishing. And it's like, well, what is the point of this?
Is the Conjuring movies, is that the one where the demon has like black and red paint on his face? It's like
no,
a dark,
that's Insidious.
Okay, whatever movie like that. I remember one of those movies where the character is like doing something with their face toward the camera, and then that demon appears behind them and then disappears. And the character never saw them, was never frightened by them, was not impacted. It's just, it was for the audience's sake. It's like, so does the demon know they're in a movie?
Right. It's
like we've got to insert a scare, but it doesn't advance the plot or raise the stakes or anything. It's just like, it's been too long since we've seen.
Yeah. It's
been too long since we've seen the demon. Whereas again, compared to something like Jaws, like there's a very clear, which again, I like to use Jaws as an example because Jaws was a big budget blockbuster summer movie. Like it wasn't, Jaws is not some indie passion project. It was this expensive movie that made a ton of money. But it's a very clear, it's a horror movie. It's a slasher movie, but there's a clear progression of stakes where you see the shark's capabilities and it, as it does this and the heroes try to do this and they think they've solved the problem, then it comes back. They don't insert like random moments where, oh, we haven't seen the shark for a while. Let's cut back to the shark. Like it all builds to like this inevitable confrontation.
Right. Yeah, I think in horror movies, they often make the excuse of like, oh, the demon is trying to psychologically break you down. And that still creates the problem like, oh, for what? Like, it's a big horror movie thing because Jaws is so simple. It wants to eat you. Like, that's it. Horror movies love this like weird vagueness of trying to explain like, it wants life or something like that. And it's like, what does that mean? What's at stake?
And like the clown, the It movies.
Oh yeah.
Pennywise feeds on fear or whatever. But in general, between those two movies, if you've shot like 5 hours of horror movie, you've probably got too much.
Yeah. Because
there's a point where it's like, okay, all of the characters are going to go have an encounter now, each on their own with something that's scary to them, but I don't know. You're kind of waiting for them to get to the point where they fight the clown and have to defeat him somehow. And it's just
a lot of that. Oh, sorry.
But it's the same thing where I think they sat down with a series of scary scenes.
Yeah.
And that's it. Like, there's not necessarily a progression or raising of stakes. Just like, okay, here's our horror beats. And then you, the screenwriter, you're going to write in some character stuff to connect it all together.
Yeah. That movie starts with Pennywise killing a kid who's just alone. And then after that, never does that again to any of our main characters, even though he'll frighten them while they're alone. And then they run away. And it's like, what are you waiting for, Pennywise? Eat the children. They're right there. They're alone. You can do it at any time. You can show up anywhere. Like, they show that Pennywise can be there at any point, but they have to, because the characters have to live, he has to just, not do the things. You mentioned the length, and that's one of the things we wanted to talk about, which is action films or horror films being ridiculously long. Why is that happening?
I think this all starts with Titanic, because once upon a time there was a rule that if your movie was over, I think 2 hours, you limited the number of showings a theater could do in a day. But
Right.
Titanic was 3.5 hours long and broke every record. And I think at that point, any action director, if it's Michael Bay saying, no, I need 2 hours and 45 minutes to tell this Transformers story, that they just can't say no to him, because the excuse of, well, it limits showings just didn't work anymore. And the idea that you need pacing. But it is, if your action movie is 2:45, as at least one Transformers movie was, I can guarantee you have long side quests and fetch quests and stuff you've got in there padding out. You do not have a clear ABC, tense the whole time building to a conclusion. You've got, because you've not written like a great emotional epic. You've got a whole bunch of sequences you've decided you just cannot lose, and a bunch of dumb subplots that you've decided you cannot lose. It's all got to stay in.
Right. That's I found a fun little bit of information here. So in 1987, there were about 22,000 theater screens in the country. In 2018, that number was doubled. It was 40,000 plus. And that's one of the reasons people are talking about, is that there's just there used to be a time where it was it has to be short. We have stuff to do from the perspective of the theaters, where they're we want to get in as many showings as we can. They used to have to double up theaters, stuff like that. Nowadays, it's we'll devote an entire theater or 2 theaters to your movie, a movie like Tenet.
Keep in mind,
so there's just less push from studios. Studios aren't make it quick anymore. There's no incentive for that.
A movie theater in my youth was a place that had 2 screens.
Right.
We do not have a Cineplex that has 20 screens, whereas now I have 4 of them in my city. But where a Blockbuster comes out, if they release another Avengers movie, they'll have it on 8 screens. That did not used to be a thing.
Yeah.
But that's part of it. I think there's just less room for the studio to push back and say, so now you've got, in the streaming era, now you've got a Snyder cut how long was it?
4 hours?
Yeah, which is fine, because people just watched it the way they would binge watch The Mandalorian, just throw it on and it plays 4 episodes of an hour-long show. They're not thinking of it as a movie. It's just a series of episodes.
That's what occurred to me about the Fear Street movies, is if you watch them, they advertise them as 3 movies. It's actually just a mini-series that they put into 3 movies, and it suddenly all makes sense, where you're why did they make 3 movies simultaneously? They didn't. They shot a mini-series like they would Stranger Things, and they just edited it in a specific way that made it 3 movies, and that works for them. So yeah, I think streaming is a big part of it, right? A lot of these movies, it used to be that when a movie was really long, it didn't do that well sometimes.
Once
2001 wasn't seen as a success, because it was people had to sit in a theater and endure that. And I think now it's like, no, you'll be in the comfort of your own home. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But it does. You're right, though, that is a horror movie or an action movie is 3 hours long. I do think there's some failure in the writing. Unless you're making an epic, unless you're making Lord of the Rings, there's no need to make a ridiculously long movie. Space Jam, the new Space Jam, is 2 hours, which is fine if that was, an action movie or a sci-fi, but it's a kid's movie. That should be 90 minutes, which is what the original Space Jam was.
Yeah, animated movies, like in many cases, are even shorter. They'll be like 85, 83 minutes because animation moves very fast. Like it's sped up. It's animated. So Pixar movies tend to be short, or at least they used to be once upon a time.
Dumbo is exactly 1 second long. But it is actually it's like 61 minutes or something.
Yeah, because it's for kids, and also in animation you can cover a lot of ground in that amount of time.
Right.
But yeah, in general, just structure in general of action movies these days, which is our next point. Like so many of them they're structured basically like video games, where it's just a series of like fetch quests, like any plot where there's 3 parts of this object and we've got to collect them. I just kind of groan because that's such a video game thing to do. I get it. Screenwriters grew up writing video games and their audience grew up playing them. So that's something they're familiar with, but it feels like such a treadmill, and it feels like just, we're going to go here, we're going to go here, we're going to go here. And it's not constantly raising stakes. It's just changing locations to get your action beats in. And a lot of these movies, you could have swapped around scenes and give them to you in a different order and it wouldn't affect anything.
It's all right. Yeah. Let's move on to this, which is that movies are built on a very much an and then system where it's such a cynical view, but it really does feel like the points between the action, or in a horror movie, the horror, it's basically the writer finding any excuse to get them there, even if it doesn't make any sense. And I'm trying to think of like positive examples where it's, people can probably picture it where it's like, it's cause and effect. It's plant and payoff. It's something's building towards an idea and the characters are either trapped and they have specific goals they have to accomplish to get out. And in the case of Star Wars, the last Star Wars, which I recently watched, I want to go through really quickly what the plot points are, because I don't think they were designed for people to actually pay attention to them. I think that's what it is. In Rise of Skywalker, it starts by Finn and Poe getting information that the Empire has a spy. We cut to Kylo Ren discovering this like weird ancient pyramid, like a small object. We have learned that the Emperor is back. The characters learn that too, and they are told that these things are compasses that lead to the planet Exegol, where the Emperor is. Rey says, "I'm going to try to find the Emperor. I'm going to start where his trail went cold." That's what she says. It doesn't make much sense, but that's a random planet that looks like Burning Man. They go there, they run into Lando, who just happens to be there. He says they were looking for a guy carrying, and he literally says a clue that will lead to a wayfinder, which is the object that Kylo Ren had. This is this compass that'll find a planet that will find Palpatine. They suddenly get attacked by stormtroopers. There's a speeder sequence where they're flying through random canyons and just like they don't know where they are, they don't know what they're doing, they're just trying to get away. Their speeder is blown up, catapulting them into quicksand. They fall through the quicksand, which happens to lead into a series of tunnels. In the tunnels, they find a skeleton that has a knife buried next to it that BB-8 finds. The knife turns out to be the clue they were looking for that will bring them to the Wayfinder. On the knife, there's a language that none of them could read. C-3PO is like, I could read it, but I can't translate it because it's a Sith language, and my programming makes me not allowed to do that, which is something we've never heard before. So they have to reprogram C-3PO, which apparently they can't just do on their ship. They have to bring him to another planet to meet someone named Babu Frick, who can do this. Well, on the planet, they run into Poe's old girlfriend, the bounty hunter. She brings him to Frick. They obtain the information from C-3PO's brain. She gives Poe a medallion and says, like, this will get you on this ship. They use the medallion immediately after, thus fulfilling that one character's entire reason to be there. They get on the ship. They do like a crazy adventure. And at this point, just so we're clear, they are trying to crack a language on a knife that'll lead them to a compass that'll lead them to Palpatine. So they're finding a thing that's going to help them find a thing that'll help them find a thing. And that's where we're at in that movie. And this feels like such a... I'm not going to keep going, but it's a series of and thens. We have to go here. Why? I don't know. This will lead us to here, which will lead us to here. And half the time, the characters aren't even doing anything to initiate this happening. As I pointed out, they literally fall into a cave that just has the answer. They do this in The Conjuring. They do it in The Fast and the Furious, where it's like you walk out of a movie. I think it's why these movies are movies that you leave and you go, I can't remember what happened, because it's all kind of nonsense to just get them to the next thing.
Yeah, and in fact, I'm going to draw the weirdest possible connection here.
Okay.
Because I know why they do this, because I did it at my last job. When those of you listening who are fans of the Cracked website back when me and David both worked there, people ask, well, why are these articles in list form? One, it makes them very easy to read because you can keep track of where you're at in the article. But two, on the back end, it makes editing really easy and straightforward. Because someone can come to you and say, hey, I want to do a list about, like, for example, like you wrote a column about movie twists that that ruin the movie, that ruin the rest of the plot. Right. And then I can say, okay, give me 6 of them, or 7 of them, or 5 of them, whatever. And then the editing process is a matter of plugging in those 5 items and getting 5 strong ones. And it's instead of being this nebulous thing about, well, does the article feel right? Does it feel like it's enough? It becomes a quantifiable thing, like, boom, we can just plug this in. So If you have a plot where nothing builds off like ideally in a story, everything builds off what happened prior. I keep referencing to raising stakes. Like you uncover more information, the nature of the threat becomes clearer, the character is growing, like everything that happens, is informed by what happened before that. And in a good script, it should all work that way. And the characters in the end should become closer. Fury Road is very clean, simple script. They have a clear goal, and then, you've got a few characters, and then the relationship between Max and Furiosa, they don't fall in love, but the nature of the relationship changes where they have to learn to trust each other, over in the course of this chase. Everything that happens is based on what happened before.
Yeah.
It's
a series of organic transitions.
Yeah.
Of like, this turns into this, turns into this.
But if you are making blockbusters on an assembly line where you've got X number of sequences you want in this movie, and you need to be able to swap them around if you need to, and you don't necessarily know if this stunt is going to come in at the 60-minute midpoint, or if it's going to come in the third act, or if it's even going to be your opening. You just know there's going to be a scene where this car jumps out of this skyscraper and lands in this other skyscraper. Why it's doing that, we'll figure out later. And where it goes in the movie, we'll figure out later. I think you wind up using this kind of fetch quest structure for the same reason we did lists, where it becomes very easy to you have like a modular movie where you can move scenes around, you can move sequences around and things like that. It's just that when you're watching it, it's just a row of things happening.
Right. It's the same format as a treasure hunt movie. Like movies like Indiana Jones get away with this because it's literally we're trying to find clues that lead us to the next thing. But every movie has taken this up, and it becomes weirdly like gibberish. The Fast and the Furious is a great example. Like the new one, there's like this MacGuffin that'll what is it? Control satellites, which is they love doing that one, where the villain can control all the satellites. And then in order to figure it out, he has to like go to Helen Mirren at one point, who all she does is like drive him, give him like a little bit of information, and bring him to the villain's house. But they make that a big car chase, which is a good instinct, but it's all just, and then I have to go here, and then I have to go here, and then I go here. Tenant's another one where, like we mentioned, they have to go talk to a woman. So they grapple up the side, and you're like, why are they even doing this? They like you could give them this exposition easily any other way. It's almost like dealing out very little bits of exposition in these big scenes because they are trying to like stretch for time.
Yeah, and I realized that like Tenet, that was not made as part of like a franchise, but it has, I think it wound up in the condition it was in for similar reasons, in that he had certain things he wanted to convey, and that's that. Like, did they like, or as a viewer, am I sitting here on the edge of my seat, like when they go sailing, and the guy falls off the boat? Like, am I on the edge of my seat? Like, I didn't even know what the consequences would be if he drowned or didn't drown. It's just a thing.
They make it very unclear.
It's just a thing that's happening because in this movie, like among, he wanted to have like the tone of like a James Bond movie. So it's a bunch of very handsome people in beautiful locations doing exciting things. It's like, well, going out and sailing on that catamaran or whatever, like that's a cool visual, but they like exchange some exposition that you can't hear over the sound of the boat,
right?
So it's
I think Christopher Nolan he's like a sophisticated Michael Bay, where like characters don't really matter to him. He's trying to get from the next thing, one thing to the next, but just he has more like high concept ideas, I'd say, than Michael Bay, right?
Yeah.
So there's... Oh, sorry.
Well, no, it's just if people listening to this, like some of you are creative types, some of you have tried to write movies or write stories before on your own. For the rest of you, if you've never tried to write a story, you first, like anyone can do it. You have the idea for a story. And like you could say, well, I've got an idea where it's like Harry Potter, only instead of a wizard, he's like a ninja. He goes off to ninja school. Like that's a great idea for a book. Okay. When you sit down to write it, what you're going to find out is instead of being this magical process where images and dreams come to you, it's a very mechanical process of here's a list of things I need to tell the reader. Like, okay, how old is the character? Well, I have to convey that somehow. What's the character's personality? I have to convey that somehow. What's the character's abilities? Are they already good with the sword, or is that a natural? You've just got a checklist of things of information you have to transmit to the audience. And a bad writer will obviously just have someone show up and say it. And a good writer is you start with that and you think, okay, what's a creative way that this information can be conveyed, either visually or through action or whatever, that propels the story forward. So like in a noir type mystery, you've got a detective. It's propelled forward by that character's curiosity. And so he's meeting this exotic range of characters and he's talking to them. But in each of those meetings, there's a conflict. Like that character doesn't want to tell you what you want to know. So you've got to outsmart them, or you got to fight them, or you got to threaten them, or there's like this cat and mouse game, and that's the drama. Like you, the audience, want to solve the mystery, And so you're watching this guy do it, and you're in the room with him, and you want to find out what. And so later he comes back and he breaks into the office, and he's sneaking through the desk looking at the files, and you just know somebody's going to come in that door behind him. And it's tense because you want to find out the information and you don't want him to get caught. It feels like some of these movies, they don't take that next step because the only thing that matters is getting to that next action scene. So it's like, okay,
yes,
we have to get Ray and her crew to this next MacGuffin. So let's just have them fall down a hole.
And then it's just there.
It's just there. They stumble across Lando, then they stumble across the knife, then they stumble across. It's kind of shocking how many movies have that, and then they stumble across blank structure, because that's kind of the only way they can do it. Whereas if you had time to actually sit down with the script from the start, you would think, well, let's make this a fun adventure where she's trying to find this knife, where she takes them there, and maybe there's tension because they don't believe she knows where it is, or somebody tries to stop them. But if you just know you've got like a chase through the desert, and then you've got a scene where they're in this tunnel, the only way to connect them is just have them fall in a hole.
It's so lazy because the other factor that you haven't mentioned is time, where it's you not only have to give the audience all this information, but you have to do it in a specific amount of pages. And sometimes it's easier to just create quicksand.
And I know, and we don't literally mean lazy there. The people who worked the schedule they put in to get that last Star Wars movie made, those people worked themselves into the ground because they were given a completely unrealistic schedule because they wanted to make this release date.
It's hard to get information across really quickly in an elegant way. Some movies pull it off, some movies don't. It's tough.
Fury Road, we can keep holding that up as this great example because that is a passion project that George Miller lived with for 25 years. Like he was trying to get that made through the 80s, through the 90s, through the 2000s. Like he just obsessed over it. He wrote like an entire novel's worth of material. So yeah, you can watch that movie, and in the first 7 or 8 minutes, it conveys a mountain of information to the viewer with barely a word spoken. Like everything about this culture that they're fighting, the nature of the hierarchy, everything is conveyed very quickly, very visually, but that took a lot of care.
Right, and you can go and look at more studio films. Like, for example, Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, is the result of a writer having ideas shouted at him by Spielberg and George Lucas. Like, you can find a transcript of that, where they're literally being like, you should put this in it, you should put this in it, ooh, can we put this in it? And then the writer went and processed it and found really smart ways to introduce all the things you needed. You know, the first sequence of Indiana Jones, you find everything out about him without really them saying anything, you know?
Everything about his personality, how he solves problems.
Yep. That he hates snakes. That's the only thing where he just yells it. But everything else, and then he just shows up at work, and his boss is like, we need you to do this. And they explain exactly what it is. And then we're off. Back to the Future, the first shot of Back to the Future shows Doc Brown's like crazy wall of inventions. A TV turns on. You see that plutonium was stolen. Marty walks in, all in the same shot, kicks his skateboard across the shot. It hits a box labeled radioactive. So you know all this stuff about Doc and you haven't even seen him yet. And it's literally the first shot of the movie because someone figured out all these little subtle ways to get the information you needed without having a character have to be like, oh, that Doc Brown, yeah, I know all about him, and having to explain what he's like.
Yeah. Meanwhile, in like Tenet, the way he finds out the mechanics of the reverse time stuff is he goes into a room and a very bored woman just tells him.
Yeah.
And he's very bored to find it out. Like to find out that everything he knows about how the universe works is completely wrong. He's just like, okay. Like, all right. Like the way time travel should have been introduced in that movie should have been him fist fighting with a man who is going backward in time.
Right,
like
and
that,
figuring out the rules.
That fight
as it was happening.
where he's like, and it should have left him shaken to the core, where he's like desperately trying to find out. I just fought a guy who was going backward in time. Am I losing my mind? Like what's happening? And then he meets Robert Pattinson, is like, okay, I need you to sit down because what I'm about to tell you sounds ridiculous, but it's true. Yeah. And, and it's urgent that you understand this right now. And then, that guy was actually trying to kill your daughter because your daughter is going to grow up to be the president, and they're trying to kill the president of the youth. It's like, oh my gosh, my daughter, I'll do anything to save her. What do I have to do? It's like, well, you're going to have to invert yourself through time, and then boom, now you're off to the races. But instead, it's like he overcomplicates it so much. It's not a dumb movie at all. Like, it totally lost me at points. It's just that it's so inelegant in the way it tries to lay out what it's doing, where it's just one conversation after another after another. And you can even see like the people in charge of locations and costume and everything. It's like, well, this conversation is boring as a dog's ass. So we're going to have this in like the coolest location possible. And they're going to be wearing the coolest suits. And they're going to be strolling along this beautiful bridge. It's like they're trying to sex it up because ultimately it's this person finding out a piece of information with no forward momentum. There's no urgency. He's not desperate to find it out. There's no one trying to stop him from finding it out. It's just a series of like quiet conversations. It's very, I could complain about the movie all day, but it violates a lot of these rules for a movie that should have been like a world-changing movie by all rights. Like the concept, everything is so great.
It's extremely weird how they aren't able to. That's what it comes down to a lot of times. Like, that's remarkable. Like, you just had me thinking about Star Wars, the Knights of Ren, characters who we barely see, which is Kylo Ren's little army there. There's like 5 of them. They show up in that movie. We know that Kylo Ren is trying to find Palpatine. Why not have, instead of stormtroopers, the Knights of Ren attack Rey, and instead of finding the knife in quicksand, one of them is like using the knife, or one of them has the knife on them because they're also looking for Palpatine. Bam, you just did an action scene that propelled it forward. But instead what they do is as we're talking about, they do action scene, stop, exposition, stop, action scene, and so on and so forth. Like, they don't, because of the reasons that we'll go into later, they can't like combine the two ideas. And it makes it so that everything between action scenes is a series of gibberish designed to get them to the next thing.
Yeah. And just to be clear, like this movie, those little triangle things, the navigators or whatever, they decided what those were on reshoots. There's a lot of lines of dialogue where you can't see the character's face, like they're talking from behind them or whatever. This movie was re-edited and reshot so that those little triangle things, and I didn't come up with this. There's people who have worked out what they originally were supposed to be. They're like holocrons or something.
Oh, no, really?
That it's clear that on reshoots they made them something else, because I fully believe that the Emperor and that whole thing was added in reshoots, so that they had a cut of the movie or a version of it. That, the screenwriter for this thing was brought on board after they had started shooting, long after pre-production had finished. Like, this was not a movie somebody sat down and wrote in any meaningful sense. This was a movie that was thrown together in a panic to meet a deadline, with people working 100-hour weeks plus and sleeping on office floors, trying to get something coherent out the door. Yeah. Everyone involved in this movie knows these basics of storytelling. I'm talking about things that you learn if you go out, on Amazon and buy like a little cheap paperback book on how to write a screenplay. It has all this stuff in it. This is the first thing they teach you on the first day of creative writing class. There's nobody involved in these movies who somehow just doesn't know how stories work. But yeah, in order to get that movie out for that December release date, it's like, well, this is what you're getting, because you have to finish these effects shots. The effects people have to know, like, they're rendering these Star Destroyers now, so they have to be there. As to how they're there, who built them, who's manning them, that we lost that like 4 script drafts ago. They're magic. They were magicked by the Force.
What's amazing to me is this still applies to movies that don't have that problem. The Conjuring 3, which I don't know if you've seen, but it is also a series of weird fetch quests to the point that they forget what they're doing. Like, if you watch the trailer of that, the premise that a man commits a murder and claims the devil made me do it, you think that's going to be the film. It isn't. It's like the first 20 minutes. And the Warrens say, we'll help you out. We'll go investigate this demon that you claim to be possessed of. And then they find a previous case of a woman who is possessed. They follow that thread, which leads them to like a church with a priest, which they start dealing with that. They go to like a morgue and like psychically connect with another character who died, and they have to fight demons. Ed Warren gets possessed. They do this big weird thing where they're like fighting this demon in a church basement. And then they win, and then it ends with the guy at the court getting the verdict of like, we're pushing it down to manslaughter, and you're gonna get out in 5 years. And he's like, thanks guys, and they all give thumbs up. And it was like, wait, you forgot to show the part where they helped him, because they didn't actually do that. They went on a different adventure. The movie completely loses track of what it's supposed to be doing, and that doesn't have like complicated effects stuff. You'd think like it's what's amazing, and we'll definitely get into this in the future. It's incredible when it's like the cheapest part should be writing the movie, and it's wild that they don't spend enough time on that. But there's a million reasons that we'll get into why that is.
Yeah. But by the way, anybody out there who is trying to write short stories, if you ever find yourself stuck where it's like, well, I don't know what to happen next in my story, switch to your villain and think, what's your villain doing? What are they doing at this time? Because have them initiate the next thing. Because again, it's a back and forth. But you can hilariously see like when the disaster movies were all the rage, like in the Twister era, and
right.
Or like Armageddon. You can see them trying to do this where they'll have like the tornado do something. It's like the tornado has tracked us to another location because the tornado has to be the villain. So they have to like invent, or like Armageddon will be like, oh no, another piece of the asteroid is broken off and it's heading toward Paris. It's like, because it's time for, like, the heroes aren't doing anything right now. So it's like, okay, well, we need the bad guy to take some sort of an action. That's what they're doing.
Twister is the best one though. Yeah. Cause it like gets revenge.
Right.
On Joe's like aunt or something like that. All right. Well, we have one more section. We have one last thing. We probably could have talked about this earlier when we were talking about action, but I do think this is a really important one. So our final thing we want to talk about here is the way action is done. Specifically, and we've sort of talked about it on the last thing as well, but specifically having the action fit the actual characters and the world that they're in.
Yeah, in other words, making it creative.
Yeah,
based on what's going on in that universe. So, if you have characters who can do, we mentioned this, that the Netflix superhero movie, it's in here somewhere. The Old Guard, is that what it was called, or am I misremembering?
Yeah,
the Charlize Theron. We complained about this in our podcast there, because they are a series of immortal warriors who have been fighting for thousands of years and know the whole thing is supposed to be that they know like every fighting technique. And also they can't die. But when it comes time for the action scenes, it's just AR-15s shooting blanks. It's so boring.
It's so boring. I would say the biggest offender of this is the Marvel films, because they start introducing things like WandaVision, where they're like, this is otherworldly stuff. This is psychological. Or Doctor Strange, where they're literally bending reality. Or Loki, when it's also bending reality. And then they keep stopping and having the characters like just like fight each other, like kung fu fight. And it's like, surely there's a better way for like Loki to get out of a situation. WandaVision is all about grief and what's happening to Wanda and this otherworldly situation. And it ends with them just sort of shooting magic at each other in the sky. And it was like, really? We couldn't think of any way to end this besides them just fighting? Doctor Strange is probably the best version because he does the thing where he dies over and over again. So he actually does use, like, his brain. Like, it's just weird when they introduce these, like, clever characters and then they just have to fight.
I would hold Doctor Strange up as Marvel's best execution of this, because they literally sat down and said, okay, what can this character do that no one else can do? And so how can we build the action around what you could only get this in a Doctor Strange movie? And,
right.
And you mentioned up here, like, I believe that movie was made, or I don't know, maybe the timing doesn't work out, but it feels like it was a fulfillment of what we thought Inception would be when we saw the trailer, where they literally make it a point that this, in the dream world, you can bend the entire horizon over you and change gravity. And then when it comes time to have the final action scene, it's just AR-15s. I swear that the manufacturer of those AR-15 style rifles, that they're paying for product placement, because Hollywood never gets tired of endless shooting with AR-15s. And you saw it in The Walking Dead. It never affects anything because there's always more zombies. It's just we have to punctuate the scene with a bunch of noise. And then you saw it again at the end of Tenet. Again, Tenet, a movie in which you've established, like, you've had this car chase that's all based on forward moving time interacting with reverse moving time. And the finale of that movie is just a bunch of nameless soldiers shooting AR-15s. Yep. And at no point can you tell who was winning that battle, what they're trying to accomplish, what those soldiers are trying to accomplish. You know what the heroes are trying to do.
Yeah, they literally code them as blue team and red team to make it a little easier, and it's still not. It still doesn't make sense. You don't even know who, you don't see the bad guys. You don't get a sense of how many there are, what they're trying to do. It's just, they have convinced themselves that the sound and the sight of people shooting AR-15 blanks at each other is inherently interesting. And that it adds action or drama or tension to any scene, where the finale of Tenet could have taken place inside a building that is in the process of falling down and being built because they've twisted time, and so part of the building is being constructed and part of the building is collapsing or something, or the building, they detonated and it collapses in on itself, but they've reversed time so it is reverse collapsing and they have to traverse this reverse collapsed building. Like, you could contain it where it's just 5 characters traversing this finite space where time is moving backward and forward simultaneously, and it's get creative with it. And instead it's just guns, and it just... The scene that I think sums it up perfectly is in Inception, where I think one of the characters is shooting at the bad guys. Tom Hardy comes up and says, "You got to learn to dream a little bigger," and produces a bigger gun. Yeah. And uses that. And it was like, wow.
And this is in a movie where you've already seen like a locomotive appear in the middle of a busy street. Yeah. You like they've made it clear that there are no rules because it's a dream. So you would expect, you've got to dream a little bigger, darling. You would think he'd have like a dinosaur come eat the guy.
No, yeah.
Because it's a dream. Or you pull out a gun and it melts him or something. But it's just a gun and more guns and blanks and shooting because they've just decided that's cool. And maybe other people do like that. But like in Army of the Dead, like they're going up against zombies. Guns don't really do much to zombies. It's like, well, yeah, you shoot them in the head and they fall over. But it's like, yeah, but as a coherent threat, it doesn't do anything. There's just more zombies behind them.
Right.
So like as they move through the space, it's just shooting, and all it does is like kind of clear a path for them. It's like, well, give me a more creative way to do that. Give me a more creative way of clearing a path. So it's not just endlessly shooting blanks from AR-15s.
Right. It's funny because ironically, I think the movie that did this right was The Matrix, but only because The Matrix came first. Because that's all still shooting. They just did it in a way that we had never seen before, using the world that they had created. Where they're like, these people can stop time now, so they can dodge bullets. And I wonder if The Matrix kind of created this problem. Because even movies that try to solve this creatively still love guns. I think of that movie Equilibrium, where it has gun kata. Where they're like, this time they're using the guns to do kung fu on each other, but for some reason they always still need guns.
Yeah, and again, my complaint is not that they have guns. They use guns in John Wick. It's that in John Wick or in Aliens, like every bullet that's fired does something. Right. Like if you want to watch in the original Predator film, they have this great scene where it's like it is a parody of 80s action movies, basically, for the first half. Like these stereotypical muscle-bound 80s action stars land in a jungle, they take out some bad guys, and on and on. And then these guys suddenly find themselves in a slasher movie. And they find themselves in a movie where their guns don't do anything. So there's shooting. There's plenty of shooting, but they're up against something that can't be shot. And it's great because it uses that. Like they actually have that iconic scene where they all start shooting and like mow down an entire section of forest.
Right.
and then realize we had nothing. Like we did nothing. And that's great because it announces to the audience, circumstances have changed. We have raised the stakes. These guys came here believing their guns could solve any problem. And now they're up against an enemy that is in some ways very primitive, but is also very advanced. And they have to outthink it, and they have to outsmart it, and they have to escape. And now they are like the hunted. It's great in the way it uses it to use that to its advantage. In Aliens, they have guns, but at each stage, it's clear they're not going to beat the aliens with guns. And every time, like, they try to shoot and fail or they run out of bullets or whatever, and there's even, like, the first thing that happens is they have they get into an area where they can't use their guns because that reactor is there. And so the plot at each stage, like, every bullet that is fired raises the stakes or it informs character or it moves the plot forward because they're having to retreat into this facility and so on. Like, it's always very clear what's going on. They never use the gunfire as just filler.
No, because also the aliens have acid blood, which was a great idea. So, like, one of them shoots an alien with a shotgun. The acid blood gets everywhere, burns another character. That becomes a serious problem for that character, and so on and so forth. The action, I think this is something part of the and then problem too, is like the action actually causes things to happen, like plot to move forward, or like. Causes problems for characters. That plays into it. That becomes an issue later. Stuff like that.
Right. And so the way they tell you in screenwriting class, like your scene should never be, and then this happens. It should always be because this just happened. That means this happens. In other words, it's not just a series of things occurring. It's we're in this situation because of what just happened, and then each thing raises the stakes. It's harder than it sounds. It really is.
Oh, yeah.
Because when you sit down to tell your story, it's like, okay, I know there's a scene where my boy ninja like has his first training thing, and then I know there's going to be a scene where his mentor is going to die because that's the way it happens in those movies. Like I know there's these beats I have to hit. And I know in my head when I'm writing it, I'm arriving at the first time where he's no longer in training, but he has to fight somebody for real because evil ninjas infiltrate the ninja school and kill his headmaster or whatever. It's like, I know I'm about to get here. So the challenge is I have to think about what caused this to happen. Like what from here, because if you don't have that, there's no momentum in the movie. The audience just sitting back watching a series of things occur. They have to be with the character advancing through here. It's like, oh crap, because he lost his amulet, he's now no longer invulnerable to sword attack, and he can be killed. So now we've raised the stakes, and because that happened, now he has to do this. It is a meticulous, difficult process, and I appreciate that it's hard, but I also think that Zack Snyder kind of just doesn't care, because
that's the thing, is that, like, I always compare it to, if you've ever for fun made a crossword puzzle. When you make a crossword puzzle, you have to start with a theme. They all have themes, so okay, these words have to be in here, and then you have to build around it. And if something doesn't work, an entire chunk will fall apart. So, like, writing a story, ideally, is creating a series of ideas that fit perfectly within each other, right? So that they all feel like they naturally happen. And like you're saying, it's much like making a crossword puzzle. That shit is hard, and no one can claim to be amazing at it or a genius at it. It's a struggle. It's why there's, it's why, like, the Sixth Sense twist didn't come till the fifth draft. Like, this shit takes time. Someone like Zack Snyder or some of these movies, it feels, and we said it before, like a first draft thing, because it feels like they aren't even trying. And that's the thing, is like, it's okay to try and fail, but it's weird when these films feel like they aren't even doing the trying part.
Yeah, not trying at this part. They're trying extremely hard at the effects work, the stunt work. Like that's where the effort is going. He doesn't think this part is important or whatever, or doesn't understand why it's important. But because that's the case where I do think, like, I don't think anyone was rushing him to make his 4-hour Snyder cut. But it still has a problem of not neatly, building stakes or whatever, or not tying character to action. Because again, the whole thing with, the other thing for you aspiring writers out there, your characters and your story are not separate things. A story is not like a set of monkey bars that your character climbs on. The character is part of the bars. For example, John Wick, that story can only happen to John Wick. The entire thing is that he lives out in this beautiful house, but it's away from everybody. He and his wife he has separated himself from the world. They do not have any friends. He has separated himself from this world that he had lived in, that he had created, and he is being drawn back into it. That doesn't work if you portray John Wick as being an outgoing, glib, gregarious, like, talkative guy who lives in New York and likes to party. None of that plot works if he's doing that. It all ties together because he has tried to disconnect himself from everything that's in the city, which in that universe, the city is just full of assassins. Like the city is like 25% professional assassins, and he has removed himself from it, and he has to descend back into it. Like, who he is and the story, the adventure he's on are the same thing. Star Wars can only happen to Luke, him being stranded on a remote planet, feeling like he's away from the action. He doesn't have, this whole world with spaceships and all that stuff that he wants to be a part of. He's born on this loser backwater planet, and then he aspires to be off of it. The story can only happen to him. So that's why, like, the thing with, Doctor Strange, he is a science-based guy. He believes in, his skill as a surgeon and all that. He has to learn that magic is real, and then in the end, he has to depend on magic to win, the thing that he didn't even believe in before. That's his arc. Only the arrogant, secular Doctor Strange can have that arc.
And going back to John Wick, by the way, he doesn't just use guns. He also uses horses. Even John Wick, they feel like, how do we make this interesting and different?
Yeah,
right?
By the second movie, right? Because they're trying to make every single action scene unique. Every single scene is unique. You don't get the same thing twice ever. And so, yeah, it's a lot of guns, but they also, like, they are always trying to change, you know, there's a lot of hand-to-hand stuff or whatever, but they're always trying to change so that it's never just generic. We're going to okay, we have to shoot the zombies for a while, and now we're going to do this, and then we have to shoot the zombies for a while, and now we do this. Like it, but anyway.
Geez. So we said we were going to do a short one this time.
No, we failed in that.
We failed, yeah. That's all right. I forgive us. I think the listeners forgive us. Any other final thoughts? I feel like you've pretty much wrapped it up.
No, yeah,
right,
and again, anything that didn't make it in here, we'll bring into the next episode. It's going to be about mistakes people make in just world building in general, trying to build your fictional universe. This one was about story structure. That one was more about just when you're setting the stage for things in the larger, just failures and try to convey setting, that kind of thing. We'll get into that in the next episode.
Yep. And I think just sort of potpourri of anything we forgot to mention.
Well, we don't say that out loud. It's implied that anything we forgot to mention we're going to put in that episode. It's more of a catch-all miscellaneous, but
yeah, it's like a sack that we're just throwing everything in.
The things that occur to us
delicious stew
in between recordings that we should have mentioned this time but failed to. We will invent a reason to mention them in the next one.
All right. Well, until then, hey, everybody, thanks for listening. Jason, thank you so much for co-hosting with me. Do you have anything you'd like to plug? I should note that if you want to start plugging stuff at the top of these, and, you know, like just to get that out of the way. I always feel bad when it's like 2-hour podcast and then it's like...
Yeah, I guess some people do probably bail out before now. But yeah, we'll do that next time. But yeah, the last novel I wrote is a science fiction novel called Zoe Punches the Future in the Dick. It is available anywhere you buy books, in hardcover or ebook or audio, any format, any place. Also launched a Substack newsletter at jasonpargin.substack.com. It's just a blog you can read online, or if you want it emailed to you, they will do that too. You just subscribe. It's free, completely free. There are no ads. It's just it's a blog that they will email to you. That's the thing they're doing now.
That's all right. Sounds good. Well, I should probably plug the Patreon, patreon.com/gamefullyunemployed. You go on there, you find exclusive podcasts like Tom and Jeff Watch Batman and Fox Mulder's a Maniac and Star Trek The Next Futurama. Check it out. It's wonderful. Yeah, that's it. We still haven't figured out a zany anything, right? We're still not
No, that our zany sign off our catchphrase will probably have to wait for episode 3.
All right. Well, this has been Movie Bros. Bye everyone.